Today I'm going to be talking about lipless crankbaits, what is a lipless crankbait, how I fish them, and most importantly, how can you catch bass fishing a lipless crankbait. Stay tuned, hope you enjoy. Let's start with what a lipless crankbait is. It is a bait fish style hard bait that has metal BBs inside that create rattle and noise as you bring it through the water. It has a very tight wobble when you retrieve it because of the way the line tie sits. You pull it through like this, and it'll wobble back and forth, creating a lot of noise and pushing a lot of water as it moves through the water. Very great bait for catching bass on a reaction style bite. Now let's cover ways to fish a lipless crankbait. First off, my number one favorite is a technique called yo-yoing, sort of like jigging, where you will let the bait sink to the bottom and you'll lift it up off the bottom of the lake that you're fishing and then let it back down, pick it up, let it down very rapidly, and looking for that reaction strike. And this is a great technique trying to mimic a crayfish or maybe a wounded bait fish on the bottom, but just very simple, just lifting it up, and you can vary how high you lift it, how hard you lift it, and just got to find out what the fish want, and if that's how you're catching them that day, then kind of running through variables on that and seeing what the fish want. Another technique that I'll use is just a straight retrieve of casting it out, and you're just going to wind it back. And this is probably something you'll use in more of a shallower situation, and you're going to want to, like a spinner bait, you're going to want to give that bait a few pauses, maybe snap the rod, pop it a little bit, but for the most part you're going to be running a straight retrieve. It's also great when there's maybe some grass that hasn't come fully up off the bottom, and you want to run right over top of that grass, just kind of hitting the top of the grass. That's a great way to use more of a steady retrieve, but it's crucial that you still add some variances to the cast to try and grab fish on a reaction strike. And finally, another way that I like to fish these baits is to cast it into some decent grass, weed edges, and where those bass might be waiting to ambush, and ripping it out. Very, very great way to create those reaction strikes where those fish are waiting to ambush, and you'll generate some heavy hits. It's definitely a favorite technique of mine. Very crucial though that you use braid in this technique. I typically use a 10-pound braid, and it's very crucial that you use that because there's no stretch in the braid, and it gives you an easy time ripping that bait out of the grass when you're using that technique. But very simple, just cast it into the grass and rip it out and wait for them to hammer it. Now that we've covered how I like to fish these baits and the techniques that I use, I'm gonna go over what baits I use primarily for each specific technique. For starters, we'll go with the yo-yo technique, and my favorite bait for this technique is the Strike King Red Eye Shad. For one specific reason, it has a very distinct wavering fall. It falls very nicely in kind of a wavering fashion. It's very, very great for that reason in the yo-yo technique, and its rate of fall is quite decent, so you do not have to be waiting forever when you're fishing in deeper water. I will use the Rippin Rap sometimes for this technique, but most often the red eye shad. Whereas the Rippin Rap I will be using when I am fishing in grass and around those weed edges. It is a very sleek, thin bait. Fall rate is quite quick, and just when you're gonna be in the weeds, ripping it out, and you can just move quick with this bait and it just rips out nice, and it's a great bait for when you're fishing in and around those weeds, ripping it out. That's what I use the Rippin Rap for. And last is the Storm Rockin Shad. Because of the shape of this bait, it's a little bit thicker than, well, definitely a lot thicker than the Rippin Rap. So because of that, it is creates a little bit more drag coming through the water. So on more of a straight retrieve style, you can run this bait a lot slower, higher up in the water column. So when there's a time when you want to slow down and still use a straight retrieve, this bait will be higher up in the water column. So that's when I'll pull this bait out, is when I want more of a straight retrieve, maybe over some grass, where I don't want to be sinking into that grass but just coming over top of it. I will use this for that type of scenario. Whereas I could use these other ones too, just in a deeper type scenario for that when I don't want to move as slowly. So keep that in mind, that each bait has a different style that it falls, different style that it retrieves, and different speed that it will be in the water column when retrieved, just a straight retrieve. Very, very good to know when picking a bait for the situation that you're going to use it for. Next up, let's cover some size and color. I keep it pretty simple. Like most of my fishing, I typically fish your half-ounce sizes. Some brands like the Rippin Rap are a little different. This would be a number 6 size that is equivalent, but most of the time it's around a half-ounce size. When I do feel like I need to downsize or fish a little bit more of a finesse presentation, then I will downsize, but most of my lipless crankbait fishing is done with this size. Color is dependent on what I am fishing. Most of it is clear water, so I typically fish your natural bait fish colors, like your sunfish, bluegill type patterns, and also your natural metallics when a bit of flash seems to be what they're keying in on for a bite. But other than that, I don't stray too much away from natural colors. Unless I'm in a bit of stained water, then I will pick up your more brighter patterns and something that'll stand out in that stained water. When it comes to line, fishing a lipless crankbait, I keep it pretty simple. I fish most of the yo-yo and open water straight retrieving techniques on 12-pound fluorocarbon on a bait cast setup, and when I know I'll be fishing around weeds and on weed edges with a Rippin Rap, and I'm going to be ripping it out of the weeds and fishing fast and trying to generate those reaction strikes, I will be fishing a 10-pound braid with a bit of a beefier spinning setup. Keep it simple, and 12-pound fluoro in open water, and some type of braid when you're fishing around weeds, and you'll be ripping it out of the weeds. When it comes to hooks, I typically fish these with treble hooks, though I will occasionally, when fishing around heavier cover, put a straight shank hook on the back and leave this treble if that is if still getting hung up in any kind of thick cover, like if you're fishing around like wood or thick weeds, I might remove this hook too and just leave a straight shank hook on the back. You will have less hookup percentage, but it still runs through the cover a little nicer if you will be fishing in thicker or denser cover. You might be wondering when to fish a lipless crankbait, and my answer is I fish them all season long here in Ontario waters. I find they do work better in more of the springtime when the water's a little bit cooler, just maybe after the spawn, and into the summer they do quite well, but I still fish them effectively all year long. Just needs to determining where the fish are and what technique you'll be using. Depends on what time of year, so just gotta play with that and find what the fish want, but they bite these things, I find, all season long. Well, I think I pretty much covered everything when it comes to lipless crankbaits and how I fish them to catch bass. If you have any questions or anything to add that you would like, leave a comment below. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. That's my goal here, is to give you ideas on how to fish more effectively and learn something along the way. So I hope I did that today, and stay tuned. I will see you in the next video.